Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unfiltered and Unapologetic. I'm your host, Caitlin Gil-Soto, and if you're new here, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you for coming back. It truly means so much to me. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you might be thinking, when are we going to start talking about money? And honestly, that's a fair question. So, over the past year, we've had conversations about emotional wellness, healing, self-worth, boundaries, breaking cycles, and even self-sabotage. But the more I've been studying finance through my master's program, the more I've realized something I wasn't expecting. Those conversations don't stop when we start talking about money. In fact, money might be one of the places where they show up the most. Because building wealth isn't just about learning financial strategies. It's also about understanding ourselves. So, whether you're listening on your morning commute, during a walk at the gym, or while winding down after a long day, I hope this conversation gives you something to reflect on. Now, let's get into today's episode. Have you ever wondered why two people can earn the same exact salary, have similar responsibilities, similar bills, and similar opportunities, yet one feels completely at peace with money, while the other feels anxious every time they open their banking app? Or maybe you've wondered why asking for a raise feels terrifying, why investing can feel so overwhelming that we keep telling ourselves, I'll learn about it later, or why we sometimes avoid looking at our finances altogether. At first glance, it might seem like those decisions come down to financial knowledge. Maybe one person simply knows more. But the more I've studied finance over the past year, the more I've realized something that completely changed the way I think about money. Financial decisions aren't just about numbers. They're about people. Because every financial decision tells a story. And today, I want to help you understand yours. One of the areas I've been studying in my master's program is called behavioral finance. It's the study of why people make the financial decisions they do. And honestly, it's become one of my favorite subjects because for the first time, I realized finance wasn't only trying to explain markets, it was trying to explain people. When I first started studying finance, I thought the hardest part would be learning the formulas, understanding financial statements, or figuring out investing. And don't get me wrong, those things definitely take work. But what surprised me most wasn't the numbers. It was realizing how often our emotions influence the decisions we make with money. The more I learned, the more I started reflecting on my own habits, as I usually do. The moments I'd procrastinate, the moments I'd overthink a decision, the times I hesitated because I was afraid of making the wrong choice. And that's when something really clicked. Financial knowledge is important, but understanding ourselves is just as important because we can't change a pattern we don't recognize. Researchers in behavioral finance have found that our emotions, habits, mental shortcuts, and even the way that we perceive risk can influence our financial decisions, often without us realizing it. And once I learned that, so many things started to make sense because we've all had moments where we knew what the right decision was, but still struggled to follow through. Not because we were smart enough, but because being human is more complicated than that. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. And not just about money, but about our relationship with it. And when we hear the phrase relationship with money, it can sound a little strange because we usually think of relationships as something we have with people, our family, our friends, our partner. But the truth is, we also have a relationship with money. For some people, money feels like security. For others, it feels like pressure. For some, it represents freedom. And for others, uncertainty. What does money represent to you? The interesting thing is, none of those feelings are random. They're shaped by our experiences, by what we've lived through, by what we've observed, by the stories we've been told. Money isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about the meaning we attach to those dollars and cents. That's why two people can earn the same exact income and experience it completely differently because they aren't just responding to a number. They're responding to what that number means to them. The more I learned about behavioral finance, the more I realized this wasn't just a conversation about money. It was a conversation about human behavior because the same fear that can keep us from having a difficult conversation can also keep us from opening our bank app. The same perfectionism that makes us wait until everything feels just right can also keep us from investing or starting a budget. The same self-doubt that shows up in our relationships or careers can quietly influence our financial decisions too. A while back on the podcast, we talked about self-sabotage, as I mentioned. And at the time, I was thinking about life in general. But now I realize those same patterns can show up in our finances. Maybe you've wanted to learn how to invest, but every time you start, it feels overwhelming. Maybe you've been meaning to look at your spending, but you keep putting it off. Or maybe you've convinced yourself you'll start taking your finances seriously once a life feels a little less busy. If any of that sounds familiar, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes what looks like procrastination is actually fear. And sometimes what looks like avoidance is actually overwhelm. And sometimes what we call self-sabotage is really our mind trying to protect us from uncertainty. Self-sabotage doesn't just show up in our relationships, our careers, or our goals. It can show up in our finances too. Money doesn't make us emotional. It often reveals the emotions that were already there. And I think that's an important distinction because we're not talking about bad people making bad financial decisions. We're talking about human beings making human decisions, and understanding that changes everything. So, I want to ask you a question. When you hear the word money, what is the very first feeling that comes up? Maybe it's peace, maybe it's stress, maybe it's hope, or maybe it's pressure. Whatever came to mind, I want you to hold on to it for a moment because chances are that feeling didn't appear overnight. Most of us like to think our financial decisions are based on logic, that we spend because something makes sense, that we save because we're disciplined, or that we avoid investing because we just need to learn a little more first. But the more I've been studying behavioral finance, the more I keep realizing things. Our financial decisions are often influenced by stories we've been carrying for years. Stories about what's possible, what's safe, what we deserve. Maybe somewhere along the way you started believing, I'll never have enough, or I have to work twice as hard to be financially successful. Maybe you feel guilty spending money on yourself, even when you worked hard for it. Or maybe you tell yourself you'll save whatever is left over, but somehow there's never anything left. None of those patterns happen by accident. They're often connected to the beliefs we've repeated for so long that they begin to feel true. In behavioral finance and financial psychology, those beliefs are often called money scripts. They're unconscious stories we develop about money over time. The interesting thing about money scripts is that they aren't always true. They're simply familiar. Maybe your money script sounds like money doesn't last, or talking about money is uncomfortable, or I'm just bad with money, or wanting more money makes me greedy. The more we repeat a story, the more our brain starts treating it like a fact, even when it isn't. And before we realize it, those beliefs begin shaping our financial decisions. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. That's why every financial decision tells a story. And sometimes before we change our financial habits, we have to understand the story we've been living. So, the episode is called Why Smart People Still Struggle with Money. And actually, this is one of the biggest reasons I fell in love with behavioral finance, because for a long time, traditional economics assumed that people make rational decisions, that if we know the facts, we'll naturally make the best final choice. But real life doesn't work that way. If it did, none of us would procrastinate. None of us would stress by after a difficult week. None of us would avoid checking our bank accounts. And none of us would know exactly what we should do, while still struggling to actually do it. Knowledge matters. Financial education matters. But knowledge alone doesn't change behavior. Because we're human. Our emotions influence our decisions. Our stress influences our decisions. Our confidence influences our decisions. Sometimes our nervous system reacts before logic ever has the chance. Think about it. Have you ever avoided checking your bank account because you were afraid of what you find? Or put off opening a bill because you already felt overwhelmed? Have you ever delayed investing because you were afraid of making the wrong decision? Or bought something you didn't really need because for a moment it helped you feel better? Those aren't just financial decisions. They're human decisions. And I think that changes the conversation. Because instead of asking, what's wrong with me? We can start asking, what might be driving this behavior? And that's a much more compassionate question. And it's also a much more productive one. Because awareness creates possibilities, and possibilities create change. When we stop judging ourselves, we create space to understand ourselves. And that's where lasting change begins. So, the first financial skill that I think everyone should have is awareness. Because when most people think about becoming better with money, they usually think about learning how to budget, how to invest, how to save, how to pay off debt, and those are all important skills. But I think there's another skill that comes first, and that's awareness. Because until we understand what's driving our financial decisions, we'll often keep repeating the same patterns, even when we know better. You can know that investing early is important and still avoid opening an investment account. You can know you should have a budget and still avoid looking at your spending. You can know you deserve to negotiate your salary and still convince yourself not to ask. The problem isn't always a lack of information. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's perfectionism, sometimes it's the belief that we have to know everything before we begin. Or maybe we've been carrying the story that we're simply not good with money. Instead of judging yourself, I want to invite you to become curious. Ask yourself these questions. Why does money make me feel this way? What beliefs have I accepted without ever questioning them? What financial habits align with the life I'm trying to build? Because awareness isn't the finish line. It's just the starting point. Awareness is the moment a story stops controlling you and you begin writing a different one. And I think that's where real change begins. Before we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with one final thought. For a long time, I believed becoming better with money started with learning more. And yes, education matters, but I don't think information alone changes our lives. Awareness does, because awareness helps us recognize the stories we've been carrying, the habits we've repeated, and the fears we've mistaken for facts. Maybe you've spent years telling yourself, I'm just bad with money. Maybe you've believed you'll always be behind, or that financial peace is something other people get to experience, but not you. What if those aren't facts? What if they're simply stories you've never had the chance to question? You are not your financial mistakes. You are not defined by one difficult season. You are someone who can learn, someone who can grow, someone who can choose differently. And over time, those different choices become different habits. Those habits become confidence, and confidence becomes the foundation for building wealth, not just financially, but emotionally. Because every financial decision tells a story. And sometimes before we change our financial habits, we have to understand the story we've been living. Only then can we begin writing a new one. And now let's end the episode with a prayer per usual. Put your hand on your chest and take a deep breath. Dear God, thank you for being a God of wisdom, provision, and abundance. Thank you for reminding us that our worth has never been measured by how much money we have, the mistakes we've made, or the season we're walking through. Lord, when I feel anxious about money, bring me peace. When I'm carrying fear, shame, or guilt around my finances, bring me freedom. Help me become a wise steward of what you've entrusted to me, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Give me the wisdom to make thoughtful decisions, the humility to keep learning, the courage to face the areas I've been avoiding, and the discipline to stay consistent, even when progress feels slow. Teach me to trust you while also taking responsibility for the choices I make each day. Help me remember that building wealth isn't simply about accumulating more. It's about creating stability, opportunities, generosity, and the ability to serve others well. Thank you for walking with me as I continue learning, growing, and becoming the person you've called me to be. I love you, thank you, and I trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Before you go, I'd love for you to sit with this question. What story has been influencing your financial decisions? And is it still serving the person you're becoming? If you enjoy journaling, write about it. If you're driving or taking a walk, simply spend a few moments reflecting on it. Sometimes the question we ask ourselves become the beginning of the answers we've been searching for all along. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. If this episode encouraged you or gave you a new perspective, I hope you'll share it with someone who could use this conversation too. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, leaving a rating or review is one of the best ways to help more people discover these conversations. If you want to put your thoughts on paper, feel free to look at my digital products along with my blank journals. All links are in the show notes. And don't forget to follow us. As always, be kind to yourself. Keep growing. Keep asking questions. And remember, every financial decision tells a story. The question is, what story are you writing? I'll see you guys in the next episode.